Well, happy Easter, everyone. All right. Got some soul going on this morning in this room. I like that. Let me start off with a very well-known story. Once upon a time, in a faraway kingdom, there lived a young girl named Cinderella. She was a kind, gentle, and beautiful child with the most radiant smile. Cinderella had a heart full of love, but unfortunately, fate hadn't been kind to Cinderella. Her mother had passed away, leaving her alone with her selfish stepmother. Stepmother had two daughters of her own, and she was terribly jealous of Cinderella's beauty and her kind heart. And she treated Cinderella unfairly, making her do all the housework and dress in rags while her own daughters wore fine clothes and lived in luxury. But one day, the kingdom received exciting news. The prince was hosting a grand ball at the palace, and every maiden in the land was invited. Cinderella's stepsisters were overjoyed, and they spent weeks preparing their gowns and practicing their dance moves. Cinderella watched her stepsisters with a sad smile, hoping that she might be able to attend the ball and experience a bit of the magic that she had heard about in her mother's stories. But her stepmother was insistent that Cinderella would stay home and continue with her chores. The night of the ball arrived, and Cinderella was left alone in her old clothes while her stepsisters and stepmother departed for the palace. And she sat by the fireplace, tears in her eyes, wishing for just a taste of the magic that her mother had told her about. Cinderella, one of the most popular fairy tale Disney, stories of all time. Question: is Cinderella a happy story or a sad story? Louis says it's a tragedy. If you're new here, Louis is like our mascot. He's the dude in all royal blue up here in front, and we love Louis. Everyone else besides Louis, is this a happy story or a sad story? Interesting. What was that? Oh. You're reading my mind, my man. I see you in the white shirt, right? Yeah. Well, just as he said, it depends. Depends on when you stop telling the story. If that's how the story ended for Cinderella, sitting alone by the fireplace, tears in her eyes, marginalized, neglected, and wishing for a better life, no redemption in sight, it's a sad story. It's a tragedy. It's traumatic. But we all know how the story of Cinderella ends. And where I stopped reading is not the end of the story. It's just where I decided to stop telling the story this morning. My wife Rachel was just up here doing announcements. We love Thursday nights in the Lohman household, particularly like 8 or 9 p.m. Kids go to bed, so there's finally peace and quiet. And we get to watch one of our favorite shows, Law and Order SVU. Anybody? Yeah, okay. Olivia Benson. Who here is Olivia Benson fan? Okay. Who here, give me Stabler? Okay, a couple. 8 a.m. was Minority 2 on Stabler. I actually I kind of like organized crime a little bit more. That sounds weird to say that. I like organized crime more. So maybe I just got myself in trouble. I don't know. But literally, just 3 weeks ago, we're watching it. Towards the end of the episode, And there's this dialogue between Olivia Benson, who, she's in charge of the Special Victims Unit for NYPD, and she's talking to one of her officers. And of course, SVU's like just horrific stories, right? Tragedies, sexual abuse, rape, etc. And so she's talking about just all these traumatic stories that she has seen for decades. And she just gives this iconic line. And when we hear it, Rachel and I turn to each other on the couch and pause, and we're just like, whoa, what a line. And it has stuck with me the last 3 weeks, so much so that here it is, Easter morning, and I'm sharing the quote with you. So here's this powerful line. We'll put it up on the screen. It's very simple. Olivia says this: a story is happy or sad based on when you stop telling it. If you stop a story too early, it often can feel like a tragedy. But sometimes if you let a story keep going, sometimes, not always, but sometimes, it turns into something completely different. And that is exactly what happens Easter morning in the biography of Jesus by a physician named Luke. If you're new to church, which we're just so glad you're here, there are 4 biographies of Jesus in the Bible: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And this morning, I'm going to open you up to a scene from Luke. Luke chapter 24. Luke is a doctor, and so he very kind of strategically arranges these scenes in the Easter story. And here's what's happening. You have 2 disciples that are going on a walk, and what you need to know is that they're walking like it's still Friday. And Luke tells us that these 2 followers of Jesus are walking from Jerusalem to a village town called Emmaus. Jerusalem was, kind of the epicenter of everything, especially in the life of Jesus. Of course, he did things in other areas called Galilee and things of that. But in terms of Holy Week, Jerusalem was where everything went down, including his crucifixion. And so they are leaving Jerusalem, walking to this village called Emmaus. And it was a 7-mile walk. And I would imagine that these were 7 miles of confusion, 7 miles of disappointment, 7 miles of trying to make sense of all these traumatic events that just happened. Jesus is dead. The movement is over. The dream is gone. And then they said it out loud with, quote, "We had hoped." We had hoped, meaning past tense. We had hoped that he was the one. We had hoped that he would redeem Israel. We had hoped that the story would turn out differently. Let's hop in now. Luke chapter 24. I'm going to start us at verse 13. We'll put it on the screen. If you're here and you want a Bible, we have these underneath your chairs. You can take it home. Here's what we read. Now that same day, Easter. So this all happens on the day of Easter, 2,000 years ago. 2 of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they were talking to each other about everything that had happened. And as they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them. But they were kept from recognizing him. And he asked them, and Jesus, he's just so kind of sly. What are you discussing together as you walk along? They stood still, and just notice how Luke describes this. Their faces downcast. So Luke is telling us they are in a sad demeanor. One modern translation puts it, and I find this very intriguing. It's as though these 2 friends looked as though they had just lost their best friend. Verse 18. One of them, named Cleopas asked him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who doesn't know the things that have happened here in these days?" Again, Jesus, what things? "What about Jesus of Nazareth?" they reply. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. And the chief priests and our rulers, they handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him." Here it is. "But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it's the third day since all of this took place. But we had hoped that he was the one that would redeem Israel." See, if you end the story at the cross, you end up with one gigantic loss. If you end the story at the cross, you end with loss. It looks like failure. You got to know that in first century Roman culture, which is when and where this happened, Rome had a very well-known public, forceful way to end and squash any type of movement, and that was crucifixion. Jesus wasn't the only one crucified. It was Rome's way of anybody who was coming up against the government or gathering momentum and bringing hope to citizens that wasn't for Rome, they crucified. Because it meant very clearly and publicly, game over. You're done. This is what crucifixion meant in the first century. But that's what happens when you end the story too soon. It looks like tragedy. And I think it's actually really important right now for us to be honest, because I think for many of us today, like we are living in a cultural moment that is very tough. Life is tough. I mean, I paid $6 a gallon for gas 2 days ago. Yeah, you're right. It's not funny. I watched the numbers add up and I was like, oh. Many of us today, we are walking our own Emmaus road, full of disappointment, confusion, and trying to make sense of it all. And we are saying, we had hoped. I had hoped that this relationship would last. I had hoped that this job door would open. I had hoped that God would answer that prayer. I had hoped that my cancer diagnosis would be cured. I had hoped that my anxiety would go away. I had hoped that I could overcome my own addiction to alcohol or pornography or social media. I had hoped that I could reconcile with my own estranged son or daughter. I had hoped that he or she would forgive me by now. I had hoped that more money would satisfy me but actually I feel more empty than ever. And then to maybe bring some humor, if you're a Laker fan, 2 days ago, I had hoped, and then it's like Luka and AR are done. Like, hottest team in the NBA, season's over. Other than the Lakers, where in your life right now are you saying, I had hoped? Here's the problem. If you stop the story too soon, it will always feel like defeat. You remember those, I grew up on these, I think they were called Goosebumps, but it was like those stories where they had like 4 different endings. And you could if you choose option 1, you go to this page, option B, go to that page. And it's like, you could read the same book 4 different times with 4 different endings. You know what I'm talking about? Life gives you a couple options, a couple of different endings to the story, if you will. Here's one: secular culture. What do I mean by secular culture? Secular culture would be just pretty much the framework of mind that there is no God. And the way that secular culture ends the story, if there is no God and no grand author of your story, then basically this is all you got. You only live once. And I think what many of us know deep in our bones, while we are extremely blessed and fortunate as Americans, life is still painful, messy, and full of human brokenness, both from our own reasons as well as what others have done to us. And even if you are a part of the minority that live in a nice, easy, comfortable life, the thing is, even that nice, easy, comfortable life, which I think at some point you will face tragedy, but let's just say you don't. Even that story ends with death. Death is undefeated. So the secular story doesn't end all that well, because your life ends. Boom, gone. Well, maybe what's the common religious story? How does that story end? Well, common religion says, hey, you know what? Just be a good person, do good things, and then you'll live a good life. Honestly, that's karma, and karma is actually in right now. I hear lots of people talk about karma. Oh, good vibes, right? I do good things will come back to me. I'll go to a good place. Well, the problem with that story in common religion, whatever you want to call it, is that story ends in defeat as well, because you can do as many good things as you can, and you can be as good of a person as you can, but cancer's still going to do what cancer's going to do. A surprise heart attack is still going to do what a surprise heart attack does. Happened to my dad. You can do all the good things you can. Here's the other problem. Good vibes, it don't change any mistakes or failures or regrets that you've made in the past. Meaning, it doesn't reverse them. But on that Easter morning, on that 7-mile journey of disappointment, confusion, and trying to make sense of it all, Jesus reframes the story. Jesus asks them, what are you talking about? And they basically say, hello, don't you understand? Aren't you aware of what's happened the last 2-3 days? And then they tell Jesus the story. But as I realized for the first time a couple days ago, I think it needs to be said that they tell their version of the story. And here's what's fascinating. Everything that they tell Jesus is factually accurate, but incomplete. They have the right information, but they don't have the ultimate interpretation. And so Jesus steps in, and he does what Jesus always does best and what no one else can do. And he starts with Moses and all the prophets, and you're like, what does that mean? Basically what it means is that Jesus takes them back to the scriptures, to the ancient story of the Old Testament, beginning in the book of Genesis, where the story begins. And he explains to them, hey, actually, you're not telling the end of the story? And here's where the story is going. He says this, verse 25 to 27. He said to them, how foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things, and here it is, and then enter his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, meaning the whole Old Testament, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. In other words, Jesus reframes their story. He redeems their story. Jesus shows them, hey, by the way, this ain't the end, this isn't failure, and this isn't God losing. This is actually God winning, and this is God defeating death. He's like, you're not wrong about the facts. You're just stopping the story too soon. And in this moment, their eyes are opened and they recognize the resurrected Jesus. And everything changes. They say this in verse 32, were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us? And I have just a hunch that some of you right now are experiencing that exact same feeling. there's something burning within your heart? And could it be that 2,000 years later, that is the risen Jesus trying to get your attention and tell you how your story ends? And then they do something wild, verses 33 through 34. They got up, notice this, and returned at once to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 and those with them assembled together, saying, "It is true, the Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon." Notice how they respond. They get up immediately and they walk 7 miles back to Jerusalem. Same road, different direction. Because when your story changes, your direction changes. When your story changes, your hope comes back. We'll put this up as a slide. See, here's what this is so interesting to me. These two, they went from being discouraged to being energized. They went from walking away to running back. And they went from saying, "We had hoped," to "He is risen." All because they realized. Why did they respond that way? Why that switch? Here's why. The story wasn't over because Jesus is alive from the dead. A story is happy or sad based on when you stop telling it. And some of you, because I've been there before, have been living like your story ended on Friday. But Easter is the reminder, and actually I'm not even going to say a reminder, it's the reality that God is still telling your story. The cross was not the conclusion. Friday's not the end of the week. The grave was not the ending. The silence was not the final word. Sunday came. Sunday is the beginning of the week. And because Sunday came for Jesus, it means that your story ain't over either. The Apostle Paul, if you want to get to know someone who encountered the resurrected Jesus and who, oh, by the way, he was walking the other direction. I mean, Paul actually was killing, murdering, and persecuting followers of the way of Jesus. It doesn't get any more anti-Jesus than that. And that Paul, isn't it interesting, met the resurrected Jesus on a road as well. And his life went from walking that road to, whoo, I'm walking back. Should I just do the moonwalk right there? Somebody that guy cannot dance. You're right, I can't. Paul, the man whose life was flipped, who ended up writing most of the New Testament. After he encountered the resurrected Jesus, he's writing to a church community that he pastored, and he says this in 2 Corinthians 5:17. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, meaning if anybody is following Jesus, the new creation has come. The old has gone and the new is here. The story ain't over yet. My favorite theologian, N.T. Wright, puts it this way. The message of Easter is that God's new world has been unveiled in Jesus Christ, and you're now invited to belong to it. See, if you walk with Jesus on his road, his path, resurrection is always the climax of the story. If you're a Lord of the Rings fan, Tolkien's got this famous line. He says, everything sad will come untrue. Everything sad will come untrue. And I think he means that literally, come untrue, meaning your sadness will be reversed and redeemed. Not just done away with, but reversed. That is what resurrection is. It is redeeming what went wrong. And that was true for Jesus on Easter morning. He got his same body back. It wasn't a different body. His same body rose from the dead. Literally, death could not hold him down. And the astonishing good news is that if you follow that same Jesus, then as the Apostle Paul says in Romans chapter 8, verse 11, and if the spirit of him who raised Jesus Christ from the dead is living in you, then he who raised Christ Jesus from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies because of his spirit who lives in you. Can we just pause and realize, can we take that seriously? The same spirit who resurrected Jesus Easter morning, if you follow him, that same spirit is in you. And it gets better. It's all a free gift of grace. You don't got to do anything or not do anything to change the reality of that promise from the author of the greatest story ever told, Mark. That's a really good story. It makes me feel all warm and fuzzy. But here's the problem. It just sounds like too good to be true. That sounds like some fictional fantasy land Disney Cinderella story. But Mark, we all know Cinderella ain't really true. It's a great story, sure. But come on, I can't really believe that. Well, here's the difference. Disney's Cinderella story doesn't claim to be a real historical reality. Never claims to. The resurrection of Jesus is presented and proclaimed as a real historical fact. His body, his physical body, his crucified body, not just his spirit, came back to life that Sunday morning. This is why he tells one of his disciples, look at my hands, don't you see the nail marks? This isn't a children's fantasy story. This is the author of the universe changing reality. There's another person, kind of a modern day Apostle Paul, if you will, so to speak. But you may have heard his name, C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis, one of my heroes, kind of a Christian hero of the 20th century. Died back in the 50s. If you don't know Lewis, Lewis taught at Oxford and Cambridge, quite a smart man. And to get more specific, especially as it relates to this morning in Cinderella, Lewis was a professional children's fantasy story writer. So he knew fiction, he knew fairy tales. In fact, he wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, which are extremely well known, the children's fantasy books. And it's interesting, Lewis had this conversion experience in his life where he went from being an atheist at Oxford and Cambridge to meeting the resurrected Jesus and actually then using children's books to point to the reality of the resurrected Jesus. And we'll pick him up here in this quote where he's talking about the difference between kind of a Cinderella fairy story and the reality of the gospel, the good news of Jesus. And he says this: now the story of Christ is simply a true myth. A myth working on us the same way as the others, but with this tremendous difference that it really happened. And if the resurrection really happened, and we therefore know how the story ends, you know what that means? It means that you walk differently in the middle. You don't stop telling your story on Friday because you know that Sunday is still coming. And here's the deal. That is actually right now what you're going to witness and see in about 2 to 3 minutes is real life stories from people here at the bridge whose lives have switched, whose lives, they could have stopped and they could have told the story that honestly might have been a little sad because it wouldn't have meant that they told the whole story that ends with restoration and resurrection. Remember, a story is happy or sad based on when you stop telling it. Now, if you've been around the bridge, we have a program called Rooted. And just this currently, the last 2-3 months, we've had 36 people go through it. Some of them are going to be walking up here, about a third of them. And you're like, well, what is Rooted? Well, Rooted is this. It's a 10-week small group experience where there's 3 objectives. And that is to connect to God more, to be connected more to the bridge, and to connect to the purpose on their life. And here's what they're going to show you. And this is kind of a tradition here at the Bridge, and it never gets old. They're going to show you how they felt before rooted. And then they're going to flip their cardboard testimonies around, and they're going to tell you how they now feel after encountering the risen Jesus. Because again, remember, a story is happy or sad based on when you stop telling it. And as the team and the choir sing this song and we watch these testimonies on cardboard sheets, we've seen the before and the after, here's actually what I really want you to focus on. And honestly, this is the point of it. It's this. How does their story minister to you? How does it connect with you? Because here's my hunch on this Easter Sunday. Many of you have been living your story like it ended on Friday. But Easter is the reminder that God is still writing and telling your story. And if you walk your Emmaus road with Jesus, it will end with resurrection. And the question ultimately is, do you believe that? And not just believe it. Belief is important. But do you want to encounter that? Your story doesn't have to end on Friday with loss. That's a sad ending. Jesus offers you the reversal of everything sad coming untrue because of him. Here's the last thing I need you to do. When they come forward and they share their story, you got to know that takes tremendous courage. And so we need you to clap for them. And as you clap, let that physical motion be a reminder to your own body that there is a before and an after for you as well. Some of you already know that before and after, but some of you need to make the decision to get to the after of giving your life to Jesus. Let me pray for us, and then we are going to witness real life Emmaus Road direction story changes.